to this afternoon's session on municipal careers, part of the Big City Planning Directors Institute, where we're going to hear about what's exciting about a municipal career, how to do it, and what's the future. But just to get a sense of who's in the audience, I thought I'd do some hands up. Who is a planning director in the audience? Who is a...
Why are you here?
Who is a student? And who is someone else? Well, and I would particularly like to recognize Leo Asuncion, who is the American Planning Association president for another couple of months. I'm looking forward to the end. Thank you for being here. Who is a planning director of sorts. I hear him periodically on NPR talking about the Hawaiian Public Utilities and Electricity sort of commission that he heads. Well, we're here today to have this conversation, and we have a few people up the front who are panelists, who I'll introduce, but it's really going to be a sort of a conversation where they start off talking about this topic, but then we will go into questions and answers, and I do hope that some of the other planning directors as well will feel free to be part of the conversation as well as the students. Up the front, though, we have 4 distinguished planning directors. Laura Aldrete from Denver, whose claim to fame today is that she has actually worked in a lot of different institutional settings, so it wasn't always...
I was nervous where you were going.
This was quite fast.
I was going to look them all up on social media and have something, but I didn't. Vince Bertoni from Los Angeles, who didn't always work in LA, but has worked in a number of other smaller cities as well. Antoine Bryant from Denver.
Nope.
I'm sorry, Detroit, sorry, I've got Denver on the brain. But who has worked in a non-profit context as well in a number of areas. And then Edith Hsu-Chen from New York City, who is a MUP, and who started in New York City and stayed and has made her career there. So, very different paths. But the first thing we're going to do today is to actually have them talk a little bit about their paths to becoming a planning director, and also a little bit perhaps about what they look for in new planners. And actually, Edith, you're first here. Do you want to start off?
Sure. Hey, thank you, Anne. It's really nice to have you all here today. Well, I love being here. The GSD is part of my origin story. I am a MUP, class of 1997. And actually, we just came out of a session where Professor Gerald Caden spoke to us about planning law. And that was hands down my favorite class in all of planning school. And it was really bringing me back. Actually, Gerald Caden is huge in my origin story because he hired me to be his research intern and sent me to the City of New York, Department of City Planning, to do research. And I parlayed a 3-month internship into a full-blown 25-year planning career in the City of New York. I really did it the old-fashioned way. I mean, really old-fashioned. I started out as an intern, and I worked my way up the Department of City Planning. Probably not even realizing I was working my way up. I just really loved the work. I mean, I think folks who are in planning are mission-driven. They care about the community. They care about, their environment. You're surrounded by smart, motivated, caring people. And, smart is huge and motivated is huge because these people also could be doing anything else. But they committed to civil service, and that's really a beautiful thing. I know times are different now. We also had an earlier session where we met with an expert on work and the future of work. And I know Gen Z, you guys are working, you guys have a very, very different atmosphere of entering the workplace and staying in the workplace than the generations before you. Know that we are doing our best to understand, that the world is a less secure place, and we understand young professionals are moving and looking for job security. Sometimes they have to add, they have to put many jobs together. Again, I have been at Department of City Planning for 25 years, so I know I have a very different story. But we really want to encourage, I'm sure all of us really want to encourage you to join government, to join civil service. It is incredibly rewarding, and we are getting faster, more mobile. I think we're all of us are getting much more nimble. Planning has always been outward facing, and now even more so. A lot of it, the savviness of younger generations who are asking for more and asking for more participation. It is great that we're doing so much better on public engagement, on communication, and we've all been fighting the fight against NIMBY for so long. It is refreshing and wonderful to see the movement of YIMBY come up to the point where a counterpart in California says the YIMBY's they've gone overboard. It's like too much YIMBY. But it's a very, very exciting time to be in city planning, and I will stop talking here, but look forward to the conversation with you all and with my colleagues.
All right, so my path started as I was an archaeologist. I'm born and raised in Denver and went to the University of Colorado. Because my father is from Mexico, I did quite a bit of traveling as a child in Latin America, ran around on a lot of ruins and was fascinated by it, and just followed my passion. And 4 years into that, I realized I was either going to be a professor. I was spending half of my year living out of a car or a tent or a motel, and which was great when you're 23. But I was also crew chief for 8 guys that were in their mid-40s and doing it all the time. And I'm like, I just don't think that's me. I just don't think I want to show, and it, no judgment on what their choices were, but I was like, that's just not me. I also didn't like that I had, that there was no opportunity for impact in my community. I ran, a girlfriend of mine gave me an article on Le Corbusier social housing project that was disastrous in India because he did not think about the culture of place. And that pretty much changed my direction. I was very interested in international, again, like I wanted to stay involved in my international archaeology, which I was previously doing in Honduras. I spent 6 months in Honduras, 6 months in the United States. I went back to school at UCLA, I off and on, I want to say this so it doesn't seem like a bad thing, because I love my husband. I'm so happy to be married.
See the red it's going live.
So I was totally geared towards having a career in Latin America. And my husband, who is from like the neighboring suburb of Denver, I happened to meet right before I left for school at UCLA, and he's fantastic. And so anyways, we come back to Denver, we have, children and family and house and dog, whatever else you want to add into that. And I periodically have gone back and forth and done some projects in Latin America. But it just was a change. I'm just putting that out there, and no regrets. But you just don't know where life's going to take you, and it's okay, right? Like I have fulfilled that in other ways. So out of school, I have gone back and forth between private. I've worked for a design firm. I have worked for a boutique design firm in Denver. I've worked for a large engineering firm, WSP, for almost 10 years. That was the longest point of employment I've ever had. Usually they're somewhere between 3 to 5 years. I've worked for the airport as a senior vice president of real estate. I've worked for the Urban Renewal Authority for Denver. It's a quasi-judicial, quasi-governmental public finance. And the thing I learned early is I could be the best, smartest planner on a project, but if I didn't understand infrastructure, public finance, what a developer had to do, what entitlement was through the city, my idea was never going to make it, and I was never really going to understand how you build city, and that's what I'm passionate about doing. So I have had a strong an array of different positions, which has also reflective of who I am, my curiosity. I just am kind of like, that looks interesting, and then I go in that direction. Sometimes I make it to the destination. Sometimes I learn something along the way, and then I pivot. And that's just part of who I am, and so I'm very comfortable being like, let's go do this. So I similarly, because I like to, because I like myself, I look for that in people, right? I look for that curiosity. I look for that diversity of experience, because that diversity of experience, when you're in the public sector or private sector, and you can, because you will be working wherever you choose, you will be working with the other party. And having that experience and knowing where they sit and what goes through their head and how they make that sausage on that side of the table is incredibly important for me getting them to my side of the table, and for us getting something built, which is my end game.
So Laura would never hire me.
No, I mean, not true. But I mean, I think that, for me, again, like, I respond to that, so. There's a lot of people like you and me. And they're awesome, and know way more than I do.
So me? Thank you, Vince Bertoni, Los Angeles, and I apologize. I think I talked to a few of you a few weeks ago in LA, so you came out there, so it's good to see you again. But my story is maybe a lot more traditional, I don't know. So just a little bit how I got into planning. I grew up in Northern California in a tiny little town on 40 acres with cows and pigs and chickens and all that other stuff. And so I wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. I ended up in San Diego. I wanted beach and sun and still in the state of California. So I ended up there at San Diego State. I ended up studying geography because I chose that path actually because I was interested actually in two different things. I'm always was interested in design and architecture, but quite frankly, I was terrible at math, so I could never get into architecture school. I mean, honestly, it was like, I'm not sure I was gonna be able to do that. But politics and design were the two things I was always most interested in. I was always interested in politics, I was always interested in design, but I was also always interested in communities and how people come together. And I chose geography because I really was very concerned about doing this in a kind of holistic environmental. Before we said sustainability, that's what I was thinking of. You know, sustainability, quite frankly, wasn't a term probably when I was in high school and college. So looking at how do we form and improve communities through looking at through an ecological lens. So I was in San Diego. I ended up working for a small town doing a paid internship called Poway in northern San Diego County. Their motto is the city in the country. It is a small town. Ended up, and this was the late 80s, in Rancho Cucamonga, which is in the Inland Empire, which is east of Los Angeles, which at the time was very fast growing. It was converting former agricultural area and vineyards into just large tracts of housing. And so it was really interesting for me because it was like, I'm dating myself. This was before SimCity, okay? So it was like you're playing SimCity in this area, and it was really fascinating to me. I ended up losing my job. I actually got laid off after 3 years because we went into economic downturn in the early 90s. It was at the end of the Cold War, end of aerospace in Southern California. And even though there was not aerospace in Rancho Cucamonga much, it really impacted the whole region in terms of the economy. So here I was unemployed. I was like 27 years old thinking my best days were behind me as a planner. I really thought that. I was like, you think the worst sometimes in the early career, like this is it. The height of my job was an assistant planner in Rancho Cucamonga. And from the rest of the line, it's downhill from there, right? You know, no one's gonna employ me. And then ended up happening, I got a job in the city of Malibu, recently become a city. And there it was a city less than a year and a half. It was extremely politically contentious. Environmental issues were really important. Actually, issues of cultural resources were important because it was an important place for the Chumash people. So they were the first people there in Malibu. And so there was still there are many actually very important places for the Chumash people in Malibu. So I was really involved in this kind of tension in terms of how do we exist in a place where, you know, we were on their lands, they were on their unceded lands of the Chumash, and like how did we, and I had to really get involved with and kind of reconcile how we had to really kind of think about that as a city. And so that was one of the main issues. Of course, I had to deal with the California Coastal Commission and what happens in the coast. You had coastal erosion happening, we had sea level rise. we had a lot of things happening in a very small place. I think it's 28 miles long and about a half-mile wide, roughly. So it's a very long, thin area. So I was there for 5 years, very contentious, a lot of wealth there, and a lot of privilege, and a lot of back and forth in terms of what you can do with your land and land use and land rights. And so 5 years was enough. It felt like 50 years. And so I ended up in Santa Clarita, which is also a fast-growing suburb in northern LA County. And by that time, we did have SimCity, and so it really was like playing SimCity there. And it was a very, very much how do you grow as a city? We were actually planning not just homes, but schools and lots of different things. At that point in time, I'd worked in the outsides of the city of Los Angeles, and my interests, although they were I had very much a sustainability, worrying very much about the climate and how do you plan. It's also sometimes difficult to reconcile when you're worried about the climate and sprawl being part of sprawl, and trying to kind of resolve how do we plan those places better so they're more responsive to climate, and climate change was really critical. But there's only so much you can do in terms of that. So I ended up actually going into LA County, farther into the center of LA, to the city of Beverly Hills, and very much as a place of urban issues, also issues of very much privileged issues in that area, but very much issues that were very urban based. For the first time, I was dealing with real urban issues, and that area I was also very much interested in getting out of these places that were very much affluent, and looking at I wanted to really work and understand and work with and see what we can do to work in more underserved communities in Los Angeles, and really try to use the skills that I had learned up until that point. So actually, and this is something that you do sometimes in your career, I took actually a huge pay cut from Beverly Hills to go to the city of Los Angeles, about a third. I think I took about a pay cut in about a third to come into LA. And it was because I really, really cared so much about really working in communities that have been underserved. So I worked a lot in South Los Angeles and the east side of Los Angeles. I had a planning director at the time, Gail Goldberg, who took a risk. I was an unusual choice at that time for Los Angeles, but she took a risk. So she always says she was always an unusual choice for other people to hire. So she was someone who really valued that. I learned a lot. I ended up I was deputy director, so I'd been planning director in Malibu and Santa Clarita, and in Beverly Hills, went down to deputy director in LA. Was there for about 2.5 years, went to Pasadena as their director of planning and community development for about 5 years, and then came back into Los Angeles, where I've been director for almost 7 years. And so I think I have much more, I think, of a straight linear path, maybe similar to yours, but in terms of going straight through planning jobs, but maybe being kind of a roundabout about it.
So I guess I'll be the non-linear person again. So me and Laura hang out. Antoine Bryant, Director of Planning and Development for the City of Detroit. Been in my position for now about 15 months, so relatively new in this position. Native of Brooklyn. Old Brooklyn. Now, you know what I'm talking about? You know what I'm saying? So it is not this new fuzzy Brooklyn. It's old Brooklyn, you know. And so grew up in Brooklyn in East New York, right near Brownsville. Everybody that knows what I'm talking about. And I remember when I was a kid, when crack came, and it changed the dynamic of my neighborhood dramatically. And had a what do you want to be when you grow up kind of experience in 5th grade. And you have to do the whole project, you tell your class. And my dad said, I want to change my neighborhood. And my dad was like, you want to be an architect? And I was like, okay. And so he introduced me to a black architect named Harry Simmons, and I spent all day with him, me and my best friend Kenyatta, and he told us about changing neighborhoods. And that was fascinating. And I went to a great high school in New York, and then got accepted to Cornell for the School of Architecture. And I remember the very first studio, and if this is a trigger, I apologize. But I remember the very first studio, professor came in, had all the mismatched black on, and, the round glasses, and he walked in, and the whole studio's quiet. He's like, I want everyone to design a space for one. And then he left. And that was it. Like everybody was scribbling, and I was like, what the hell was that? And I quickly learned there's like the real design-heavy architecture school and kind of applied architecture schools, and Cornell was design-heavy. And I was like, I don't know what we're doing. And so after about a year and a half, I realized we had a planning school, and I took courses in the planning department and actually transferred. And I got my undergrad in planning at Cornell, which was a phenomenal foundation for me. And then when I graduated, I wanted to still design, so I went to Graduate School of Architecture at the University of Texas. The New York to Texas transition, we'll talk about it another time. But in the midst of that, my girlfriend at the time became my wife. She finished grad school. A couple years later, she moved to California. I followed her. I married up. I get that. And I started doing affordable housing development. I started doing and working in nonprofit in Oakland, and was developing single family and multifamily housing. And that's when I cut my teeth doing tax credit applications and CDBG and home projects. And this is back before we could, I had to type up stuff, and all of that, right? So doing research on the internet in its infancy was interesting, but learned a lot. Went back to grad school, finished my architecture degree, and actually worked in nonprofits and worked almost exclusively in affordable housing development and community development in and of itself in Texas, and did that for 17 years. And what was fascinating was the ability to work directly with a neighborhood, work with the community in the provision of housing, but also in the support and empowerment of residents and the communities. And that was the part I was really passionate about. And did the nonprofit thing for a while. Then, of course, every budding architect, they start feeling themselves like, I'm gonna start my own firm, right? And so I got my little, started on my own design imprint, if you will. And a few of us were designing homes, and I remember I had 5 projects. And I was like, I'm killing it, right? And this was in April of 2008, right? And then, you all know how this went. So in 3 months later, like all those clients were like, yeah, we're not going to get that house. But I'm like, but I got work. Like, we're not paying you either. So I had to figure something else out, and started doing recovery work because a little thunderstorm named Ike came through Houston, and it was wet for a while. And so we had to figure out a way to help communities recover. And so I started doing work, ironically, with the AIA and doing recovery all across the greater Houston area. Several years later, we fast forward. I started joining an architecture firm. So it was my first quote-unquote real private sector job. I worked for Moody Nolan Architects. They're the largest African-American owned architecture firm in the country. And I was helping to co-lead the Houston office, even though we were founded in Columbus, Ohio. And was doing a lot of great work, doing design work and business development all across the South. But I was working on individual projects, right? Making individual projects, individual imprints. And I wanted to make a difference and looking for an opportunity. And so I worked through APA, I worked through ULI on a number of their week-long studies that some of you have probably participated in. And it was fantastic. Did projects across the states, did a project in Belize, did one in St. Croix, really had an opportunity to make these impacts across the country and in the Caribbean. And I'll never forget, I was on a business development trip in San Antonio, Texas. And my assistant called me and said, hey, the city of Detroit is on the line and said it's emergency. And I was like, I don't know nobody in Detroit. Tell them I call tomorrow. Like, I'm trying to get this work, right? So, so I called them the next day, and this was last summer. And the city of Detroit said, we're looking for a planning director. We have $800 million in ARPA funds coming to the city. We have our private sector, our public sector, and our philanthropic sector all aligned to work on strategic impacts in our city. And our mayor said we have to find a planning director, and your name came up 6 times. And I was like, well, okay, I guess I'm doing something right? So that was exciting and interesting. In Detroit, I'd been to Detroit probably a dozen times at that time for conferences or other activities, but I never lived there. And so after a number of very interesting interviews, I met with the mayor in person, and after a conversation for 16 minutes, he said, you're the person I want, when can you start? That wasn't what I was expecting, but I was like, yeah, let me get back to you. And so after I called my wife, walking out of the room, and said, hey, I got offered the job to be the director in Detroit. And she's like, is this really happening? I thought we were just going to explore this. And so, took the position, moved to Detroit. It's been a fascinating opportunity to make a real impact in a city that's had some challenges in the last decade or so. But we have a fantastic team, many of whom I've inherited, but also I've hired 12 people in the last year. And so our department is the largest it's been since planning separated from housing. And so when I'm looking for people, and we had a fascinating conversation about this, I don't always look just for planners. I look for people that are going to be passionate about making an impact. I look for people that have a creative mind and, give a shit, right? And so if you have a planning degree, that helps. But, you're going to be moving to a city that's not as glitzy as LA or New York or Chicago. We're really excited because we're breaking ground in December on our first target, right? So that's a major thing. Oh, people are excited, bro. It's more than a thing, right? But there's a real difference that we're doing in this city that 79% looks like me. And there's a sense of empowerment, a sense of progress, and a sense of excitement in this city. And looking for good people that want to make it happen.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, I have to stand up so they can get a sight line. I actually just wanted us to have a bit of a conversation now for a few minutes about these issues. And one of the issues that has come up a lot with me is that planners today, our current corporate planning students, really want to address the big issues like climate change and racial equity. And I wonder how you could have seen that happening in your own careers and in your own cities.
Can I jump
Edith.
in? Okay, thank you. Boy, I really enjoyed learning more about you, actually. And after these very fascinating career routes, mine felt so linear. But I do want to say that within one place, you can have so many different experiences, right? I've had a number of jobs, number of positions within the Department of City Planning. So you can be in one place and take so many different roles. And I think that's just the nature of work anyhow these days. Like no one wants to be pigeonholed into a title, a repetitive job over and over. You want to explore and try different things. To get to your question, Anne, about wanting to tackle hard stuff, absolutely. We all want to tackle the hard stuff. What is so fascinating, I was reflecting upon, earlier stage in my career where I was a Manhattan planner, I was, I think then deputy director, and we were doing a rezoning of the Lower East Side and East Village. So you guys have all probably partied in the Lower East Side and East Village, but there were some, thimble, very skinny needle towers coming up on small footprints, and local preservation groups and community board asked us to rezone it. So we took a look, and we were going to rezone it to deal with this issue. Then we heard from Chinatown. We heard from folks in Chinatown saying, wait a second, why aren't you rezoning us? It must be because you're racist. It must be because you don't want to deal with, a population of Asian Americans. And well, no, that absolutely was not the motivation at all, zero. And I remember language that I used, and that was also suggested to me, or recommended to me by our law department, where you stand up in front of the community, the Chinatown community and Lower East Side and East Village community, say, we do not plan based on race. We do not do that. We're looking at this color barrier. We're just looking at land use, rationale, height, use, density. That's what we're looking at. Boy, the world is different. Today, you bet we are looking at race. You bet we are looking at race. In fact, we are now required to look at race. As planners, you have to look at race. We now have something called a racial equity report. So for every project, whether it's privately sponsored or publicly proposed, we have to put together a whole report. The applicant has to put together a report about who's living there, who's coming in and out, who's been squeezed out, who's losing housing, all of this in very explicit racial terms. And I think this is excellent and a wonderful progression of our profession. And it's hard. It is really hard to have these conversations, but it is so important and so necessary. And I think it's great that your careers are starting out with this honesty. with this, and things will change and it'll evolve, but I think it's a really, really exciting and important time to be in.
I'll jump in. I think what's exciting and interesting is that it's good that we're having these conversations. They're a long time coming. Different municipalities are reacting to the conversations differently, right? Some are just having conversations. You heard me, right? So we can talk all damn day, but I think sometimes we have to also see some actions that are married to it. I've joked with some people, after the murder of George Floyd, we're going to see more reports than ever before, right? But what are we going to do after those reports, right? I can tell you as a black guy who's been black for a long time, I don't think I need any more reports. I can tell you everything you probably need to know, and you've heard most of it. So we're excited to see some actions that are married to those. One of the exciting things in Detroit, and it's going to be a challenge. Many have heard that we're going to be addressing a highway, a federal highway that went through a black neighborhood, right, and decimated the center of black activity in Detroit, known as Black Bottom and Paradise Valley. Most of your cities have had the same thing happen, right? There was some highway that went in between 1958 to 1962 or 67, and it blew out a black neighborhood or a brown neighborhood or a poor white neighborhood. And so with us, the Michigan Department of Transportation, which actually owns the land, is going to be recreating it, making it into a boulevard, an at-grade boulevard. But it also will result into 30 acres of land. And what's exciting about it is we have the opportunity to define what that dirt is going to be. Will it be another opportunity to rebirth black businesses, and will black developers have an opportunity to have first right of refusal? Those are the conversations we're actually having right now, and those are the actions we're hoping to enact moving forward. Now, it's at the very beginning stages, but the challenge, right, is that we also have a lot of African American residents, many who are in Detroit, many are scattered across the wind since 1962, that are wondering, are they going to be included in this new initiative, or will they be left behind? And so it's exciting, it's daunting, it's several years in the making, but it's something that planners in the city of Detroit are going to be actively involved in. And I joked with our staff, I had some of our younger staff were asking, how do you become a planning director? What do you do? And I was like, well, I can tell you, as a director, at least for me, 20% of my job is actual planning, right? Maybe 25% is planning work. The rest of it is politics, right? And or having people cuss at you, right? So that's pretty much it. It's working with your council, it's working with your mayor, it's working with your elected officials, it's working with your C-suite corporate executives, it's working with the Mrs. Jenkins and the Miss, Espinosas and all of them, and making sure that you're hearing them and not speaking to them. And so that's most of my job. It's going to community meetings, which with Zoom, there are innumerable number of them. And they all expect the planning director to be there, right? So that's a challenge, but it's also a welcome one.
I'll just take a little bit of an angle. I think I would say probably unless it's a steeply conservative city, which I don't think there's many of those, we're all probably working on these efforts that you're talking about. So if planning is your profession, you're in the right spot, and that's your passion, right? And you want to make sure these issues are addressed. A little bit of a different take I would say is like, if you were asking yourself, how do I make sure that I am working on the projects or the issues that I am personally have a sense of passion towards. My example, I would say, comes from some work I did in the private sector, where part of it was making sure you stand in your truth about what it is, what matters to you, and making sure you have a supervisor or manager who sees that, right? It's going to be a hard road if nobody sees you, and then you're in the wrong place and just get out and go somewhere else. But I had an opportunity where a supervisor saw me and what my skill was for to be able to go work with community. It was doing a master plan for the National Western Center, which is at the edge of the urban center of Denver, in a historically underserved community. It has a highway, brown community, it has a highway going through it. And I spent 2 months, I was in an engineering firm, and I spent 2 months with the team that was supposed to start the master plan And every other weekend, we went out and did a community project. Not about the master plan. We went and, when they had a project to go clean the alleys, I took my team and we just went with the community and cleaned alleys. We did hamburgers and backpacks. And we just showed up with the community and just shut our mouths, listened, and learned about what their issues were. And that was probably, I don't know, $50,000 for my company to say, we're gonna do this project differently. And so it just helped for me to start with what mattered to me and what my truth is, and to find somebody who could see it and then help me remove barriers to let me do something different in what otherwise an engineering firm, it would have just been like, I have no idea what you're talking about, and go get billable. So I just like own it, right? It's good. It's really good to own, right? And especially as we have more and more diversity in our planning field, fantastic, right? It's so needed.
Let just say real quick, very meaningful comments from everyone, which I agree with. I found, those were obviously very important issues, and they really, kind of drove a lot of my career. And interestingly enough, I found addressing those issues in unexpected places. So clearly when I went to the city of LA the first time in the city of Pasadena, I knew that I was going to be dealing with issues of equity and racial justice, and lifting up on, really working with underserved communities in a more meaningful way. Which I didn't expect going to Malibu, having to understand and deal with the rights of indigenous people. I had no idea. Who would have thought that in Malibu? That wasn't my imagery of Malibu at all. But it was actually a huge part of what I did. And having to understand that was really important. I feel like I was able to make a difference in that area of racial justice in that area. When I went to Santa Clarita, which is a fast-growing suburb, what I did not realize is that there was a small but thriving immigrant community of immigrants from Latin American immigrants in an area called downtown Newhall. And it was an area which the city council was interested in changing, and our job as planners were to change this area, and it was a very thriving neighborhood. And at times it could be very frustrating. And I remember with them, but we were able to really make some change and really have our city council look very differently at that. And I remember I had a planner who was very frustrated then, who actually coincidentally works with me now in my executive team. And she and I were talking about the other day when we got so frustrated that one time, and she looked at me and she goes, you know what, I don't know that I can, the policies, what the city council wants to do here, I just think are wrong. And I think it's gonna really harm this community. And I just feel like I need to find another job. And I said, hold on for a second. No, you and I need to stay here because this community needs us more. They need us here more than they need us almost anywhere else. Mm-hmm. This community needs us here. And we're gonna stick it out. We're gonna try our best. And we're gonna make a difference. And you can find it in different places that you won't expect. And you also find it in both big and small ways. And I have this one planner who's since gone, grew up on the east side of Los Angeles, also Latina. And she told me the story, which is actually on her website, about how she became a planner. And she talked about growing up in the east side and with a single mom. And she talked about her walk to school, and her walk to school by herself with her sister. And she realized that the difference it made when there was a light, street light or not, how wide the sidewalk was, whether there was a tree or not, whether there was an awning or not, and how that influenced her so much that she decided to become a city planner because of that. So I would just suggest that you can really address these issues that are very important in places that you may not think that you can address them, and you can address them in ways that aren't as obvious. So you can be a plan, as much as LA is a vast and diverse place, you could address it. There's cities all over America that have those same issues, that desperately need people who care a lot about these issues.
Now, we could actually have more of a conversation, but I want to open it up for folks, including the big city planning directors. So it certainly will take questions from the audience, but I wonder if any of the big city planning directors want to weigh in on any of this conversation so far. Sorry, Philadelphians.
If you're nice to us, we'll be nice to you. Just remember that part. You're gonna. Louisville.
I think of you, Emily.
Always Emily.
I'd like to add a little bit different experience. I'm an immigrant, came to the United States in early 1990s and went to school, planning school here. I was passionate about planning at a very young age. So after I graduated, I worked actually at the Airport Authority in Columbus, Ohio. The planning director of Columbus is here. I love what I'm doing. It's very technical, airport planning. But then I have to pack and leave due to family reasons to Chicago and started doing long range planning there. And then I have to pack and leave again to Louisville about 20 years ago. I applied a job in Louisville planning department. I got rejected. So, and then I applied surrounding area because I have to live there. And then suburban city, a planning department job came up, so I went out there. Actually turned out to be, it's a very small, it's about 12 people planning department, but it does almost everything, like long-range planning, current planning, zoning enforcement, building permit, transportation. So I learned a lot. What I'm saying is that even a small community, even a not traditional planning, you gain experience. All of that help. And then after about 6 years, I feel like it's really need to move on. That's the only job I moved because not for family reasons. So I quit the job and applied to Louisville Metro and I got accepted. And I started with a supervisor and I never dreamed to be even an assistant director, let alone a director. So I applied for the supervisor job, I got there and about a year and a half later, I was promoted to assistant director. That was my job of my dream. And, you know, you work in the background, you make the director look good. And if the sky falls, you don't have to hold it. And that's what I thought. I thought I'm going to hold that job for the rest of my career until I retire. Until about 10 months into the job, the director decided to retire. So opportunity came, and the mayor's office asked me. I was like, I'm not ready. And they said, well, why don't we make you an interim director and you think about it. So I have 2 months interim director about 9 years ago, and I thought about it, and I was thinking about what am I going to do? You know, who's going to next director? What if the next director doesn't like me and I have to leave? I don't want to leave. I want to stay here. And at the same time, what is very important to me, when book came out. I don't know whether you are reminded, you're probably very young. 2013, a book called Lean In, published. It's very controversial now, but back then, I'm sorry, it helped me a lot. So I was reading that book, I was thinking about, you know, I can do this. I'll at least give it a try. So I went back to the mayor's office, I'm ready. So I was appointed about 9 years ago, September, and here, today I'm still here. All right. Thank you.
Hi everyone, Eleanor Sharp of City of Philadelphia. Laura, I was wondering if you could share with our audience.
I'm sorry, there's no questions from.
Yes. Tell us your origin.
Be very careful.
This is a pitch.
Okay,
This is
yeah.
the easy one.
Okay.
So the big city planning directors have addressed as a body the issues of equity. So I was just
Yes.
wondering if you could share with them our commitment to change and all the stuff that we're doing around that. That's it. Easy.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah, well, actually, Eleanor, after the murder of George Floyd, I think it was that summer, we started talking on a probably monthly basis about what do we say, what does this mean for us? Clearly, we were watching our cities change and erupt and respond, and really, I'm just going to throw it back at Eleanor because she led us through a process of creating, it was you. Of creating a statement about acknowledging what our profession has done, and it's an interesting point to say, do I have to carry the burden? And I don't, and I think it's not the burden, it's the responsibility to acknowledge where we have been in our past, and to use that to think about how we are going to show up differently in our job today, so that the future looks different for our citizens. And it was really, I think, a two-part. It was like, this is like a year and a half ago, and I'm trying to remember. But it's really to say, this is what we have done. This is what our profession has done that is erroneous and that is racist or unequal, without equity. And these are the steps that we are going to move towards to achieve that equity in our communities. And then we, as God has many planning directors around the country to sign on to this. And we had some press around it. So I'll open it up for others. But Eleanor, it's really, you led the charge. So.
I want to tag on to that because I want to talk about leaning in. This is a great looking room, by the way. Rico Kinindongo, I am the now acting director for the Office of Planning and Community Development for City of Seattle. I just want to do a quick poll because I'm totally naive and ignorant. How many people in this room are students? I mean, not how many people are students. I know there are a lot of students. How many students are pursuing degrees in planning? Okay. Are there any in this room pursuing degrees in architecture? Okay, a couple of architects, some love to the architects. So I'm a recovering architect, 27 years in architecture. My thesis, my graduate thesis though, my chair was the head of the planning department. So like, I always saw the overlap. It is great that you're all here. It is great that all the diverse faces in the room. It has been stated by a few of us now, like, pursue your bliss. Do not apologize for what you see as right, and demand what you deserve, and demand what you deserve for the community that you are serving. There is a shit ton of work that we have to do, and we have hundreds of years of ill will, misconceived direction, and just redlining, just bad, lots of bad. We are starting something. There is a movement happening, and we all want you to be a part of it. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Hi y'all, I'm Jerry Rustover from the City of Austin. I would just like to expand on something Edith said, and Antoine as well. I took a path similar to Edith. I went to work for the City of Austin immediately upon getting a graduate degree from the University of Texas, and soon will have been there for 29 years. But if public service is your calling, I would just like to reiterate what Edith said, that within city government, there are a lot of opportunities that need planners' skills. It's not all basic land use planning. That's a big part of it. But there's other opportunities within other departments to move around. You can go here, you can go there, you can return back to land use planning if you like. So don't feel that the only opportunities in municipal government for planning are just land use planning and zoning. That is what I do now, but I think that if you want to go that public service side, make sure you don't hem yourself into just one thing. You can do a lot of different things. And to Antoine's point, that as you move up in your career within planning, what you will find is that you are being a planner less and less every day. And Antoine mentioned that politics is, I think you said, at least 75-25% of your job. I would echo that. I had the opportunity, after being a planner for about 7 years in the City of Austin, a city council member who was actually Mayor pro tem, like our deputy mayor. We have a city manager form of government, so it's very different. But she cut her teeth in the environmental movement and as a neighborhood leader. And so I was a good fit to be her aide because I was a city planner. I learned an awful lot working for her from on the elected official side to see what is their perspective. So it's one thing to be a planner, to have all the skills everything you learn in school, to actually practice it, but to see how do these city council members actually make the decisions? How do they think? What do they hear when their office, when their constituents call? I found that was a very important 5 years in my career, that when I then returned back to the planning department after I was done with that, when she went for re-election, I had very valuable political skills that I would not have had otherwise. So I'm saying, if you have the opportunity, like mid-career, to dip your toe into the politics side for a little bit, I think that'll help you in the long term. And the one thing I would add to the politics that Antoine mentioned is simply management. The fact that as you move up, you're responsible for running a city planning department that is not all zoning and land use, et cetera. A lot of it is HR issues, et cetera, et cetera. It's not the sexy side of the job, trust me. Some of it's pretty miserable. But it is a reality that you are running a department, and you're running a department, of a certain size. In my case, about 54 people, and that's an important part of it as well. So any skills you can pick up as you go along that involve, how to manage people better, I would encourage you all to do that.
I'd love to add a quick point to that. What's interesting, and I know we're technically representing the big city planning directors, but I participated in a Mayor's Institute on City Design exercise earlier this year. I was part of a team. You meet with mayors. It's a safe space, and they tell us all their terrible problems. But what was interesting, it was 5 mayors from Louisiana and another mayor from Douglasville, Georgia, right outside Atlanta. And each of them were actively looking for planning directors, right? These were smaller cities, so it was like the city of Slidell, the city of Monroe, 2 others, smaller ones in Louisiana, one small one, in Arkansas, and one in the suburbs of Georgia. They were all looking for planning directors. They said they understood the value of what we could bring, and ironically, they said all of the planning people they were looking for wound up going to LA and Denver and New York City and Chicago. They said, and I knew this, if you're a planning director in like a Monroe, Louisiana, you'll have carte blanche, right? Because you'll be, quite frankly, the smartest planning person in the probably county, right? So there's a real opportunity and quite frankly, a real need, your ability to make an impact in some of these communities, definitely in the South, but across the country, in some of the smaller cities, you'll have an opportunity to touch every part of planning. Especially even as an early entry person. So it's something to consider. Not saying we don't all want you to, but there's definitely opportunities at various scales across the country.
You can work a couple of years for Antoine and then move on to one of the small cities.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Okay. Margaret, go ahead. Okay. I want to do a small poll here. I know it could be early days for some of the students here, but who is thinking about going into government? Oh, wow. Okay. And then
We need you.
and then about the private sector, nonprofit. I'll just lump them together. Okay.
2 different words. I ain't mad at them.
Okay. Well, I do want to say something about being a planner, and no matter what sector you're in, obviously you're gonna be a lousy planner if you are not listening. You gotta listen hard. You gotta listen to everyone. You gotta listen to the community. And community is huge and broad. Community includes like the folks, living in the neighborhood. Guess what? Real estate developers are people too, and the city. The community is broad, big and broad. You got business interests, residential interests. Everything goes into this. But I also, I want to make sure that you all know that there's a real responsibility and expertise to being a planner. And you are there to help. You are there to help the public, the elected officials, the city planning commission, your neighbors, and that requires you and your judgment. So it's really important that we not cede, the knowledge, the education, the expertise that you have. We're not going to crowdsource the plan. That is not how we're planning. And sometimes it gets confusing sometimes because we're doing so much public outreach, we're doing so much engagement, and then we're getting a lot of information, we're getting a lot of votes. Do this. That's not planning. You don't collect votes to see which one wins. It's not like that. It is a very democratic process, but it's a very different kind of democratic process. So I want to make sure I want to make sure that I impart to you the message that learn. Get educated, amass knowledge, and trust yourself, always with humility, always do everything with humility, but please, our jobs are really, they're important and serious, and so trust your abilities, and your knowledge and your desire to make a difference, to be positive and to make a difference. Thank you.
Margaret Wallace Brown with the City of Houston. So Houston's the one, we have a distinction. We are the largest city in America without a zoning ordinance. That doesn't mean we don't plan. That doesn't mean we don't regulate land use, and that doesn't mean we don't regulate development. We do all of those three things. We do it in a slightly different way. We just simply don't have one tool that many other cities have. Architecture school, one thing I can tell you is that throughout all of my architecture school, nobody taught me how to write. And she's just listed 3 to 4 to 5 critically important things for skills, for planners, but in my opinion, the number one thing, curiosity, passion, listening, all of those are critical, but unless you can clearly write what you've heard without bias, without jargon, without $5, don't use a $10 word when a $5 word will work. You've got to write to your community. You've got to write to your audience. And sometimes that audience speaks English. Sometimes it speaks it very, very poorly. But you've also got to have your elected officials being able to understand it. So writing to the audience is so critical in everything you do. And I just don't think in architecture school we learn that. And I was probably 20 years into my career before somebody sat me down and said active verbs, not passive verbs. It's critical.
Hello, I've been here many times. I'm the planning director of St. Louis, Don Rowe, and I have a couple quick questions. How many in the audience are from another country? Yeah. You're at Harvard. What you've been hearing is suck up all the experiences you can hear from your teamwork that you're doing with partners from all over the globe. That's really an important thing to do. Another thing, one of my favorite things to do when we come here is the happy hour. But at that, I ask a question, and it's most of you, I think, are probably second-year students, and I love to ask, what did you do between first and second year? You have all the connections of Harvard to be almost anywhere, doing any topic in any task. I love hearing what that is. Don't forget to put it on your resume. Then the last question is for Antoine. What made those multiple interviews in Detroit so interesting that you describe them as interesting now?
Well, it's interesting that I'm getting text messages literally right now about some minor brouhaha that's starting. So that's what I'm dealing with because it's politics. No, what made it interesting? The first one was with those that would report to me. So I had an interview by it was 2 associate directors, 2 planner 3s, and a planner 1. So it was none of my peers. There's nobody from HR. It literally was people from the department. The second round was with other department heads and the mayor's cabinet. So interviewing kind of, so it was all different kind of levels. Then both of those were within the span of a week. I got a call 2 days later while I was at a board meeting for NOMA. I was at the Nationalization of Minority Architects. We had a board meeting in, shouts to NOMA. We had a board meeting in Denver. And the mayor's cabinet called me on a Thursday night, and it had to be probably 8 o'clock, 8:30 Detroit time. And she's like, "Hey, your interviews went great. What are you doing on Monday?" I was like, "I got a job. I mean, what are you talking about?" They're like, "The mayor wants to meet with you." And so I was like, I mean, I appreciate the mayor and his time, but I can't just leave in 3 days, right? And so I left in 7 days. But I went to Detroit, and then that third interview, which was in person, was with several of the funders. So it was with the senior director of the Kresge Foundation, the senior director of Invest Detroit, which is one of our fiduciary agents, the director of the Community Development Agency for the city of Detroit, and then several others. And then I guess I did okay because that following morning I met with the mayor. And so they were interesting because it wasn't your typical HR process. It wasn't your typical even government process. And it was very, very quick. My entire interview process took maybe 10 days or 2 weeks. Now, I didn't actually get to start for another 6 weeks because the mayor had a past of appointing people and not talking to council, and they had gotten pissed about it. And so I did this kind of round robin of meeting all the council members via Zoom, and so we had to do all of that. And so then I had accepted a position. They all kind of knew me. I flew into Detroit. I had my first day of work. I wasn't officially in the position yet because I wasn't confirmed. We have to be confirmed, right? So there was no announcement. I just kind of left Houston, and then I couldn't tell people exactly why. And then I got confirmed on a Tuesday. But what was funny was on Monday, there was a leak. There was like a press release had gotten out. And people were texting me like, "What's going on with Detroit?" "I don't know. It's a great city." So, I kind of had to do this whole shell game thing. But what was funny is I got confirmed on a Tuesday morning, and Cranes had released something, and a couple of other entities, and no one saw those, right? But Deadline Detroit, which is an online kind of deal in Detroit, they released something and it went viral. And what was funny about it, sometimes these things, I don't know where they get information from. They put a picture up that was like some Facebook grab kind of deal. And then they said, Antoine Bryant is community development an engagement person with 25 years of experience is coming to Detroit. We're excited to have him. This 57-year-old gentleman, and my family were like, "You 57? What the heck?" So, it went out. It went out everywhere, like literally. And my kids were like, and people that I had friends that knew me for 20 years. They were like, "Is this something you should tell us?" And so that went out all over the country. So I just celebrated my 59th birthday 2 weeks ago. So there you go. Yeah.
No secrets.
Mildly interesting.
You're out there as a director.
Hey everyone, Lorenzo G. Play, Deputy Director in Indianapolis. Everything that all of the big city directors have said is right on par and very much with what you should do. The other thing I would add to it is collaborate. Collaborate and get to know the folks, not just in your college, but outside of your college as well, because those are all the folks you're gonna end up working with. You have to work with the developers, you have to work with the architects, you have to work with the landscape architects, the urban designers, right? So it's easier when you start now and you start to do that work, then you know how to do it, so.
Yeah,
all right. Woo!
Okay. Thank you.
No pressure now.
Oh yeah, no pressure. Okay. So I think your stories reflect this, but I think many that I know in the planning program, we come to planning because we're deeply dissatisfied with the cities we've inherited and the politics as well. But we're also hopeful, which is why we're here. And I think one of the things we're interested in, or at least I can only speak for myself on this, is thinking about how planning actually operates within cities and the way the planning departments are constructed. And so this has been a hot topic in the city of Boston. Mm-hmm. I think I saw Chief Jemison around the corner.
He's here. He's around here.
Not to call you out, but I'm interested in hearing. I just think many of us are interested in, going to work for cities that are really rethinking planning. And I'm interested in hearing how you are rethinking how your department organizes and operates, and maybe more specifically, what's the boldest step you've taken and what you see as next on your roadmap?
Okay. Look, I'll jump in. I'll jump in. So, first of all, one of the things you have to be careful about, and I tell this to all new planners, if you're going to a municipality that you're not from, just remember you're not from there, right? Because everybody else knows, right? So don't overdo it, don't fake it, please don't do that. That never ends well, and it could burn you before you get started. Don't walk in with the premise that you're going to save everything either, right? Because I see people nodding, but it happens every day. One of the things I've implored our planners to do, and some of them got it immediately, and some of them it took longer. I said, listen more and speak less. It's also, I actually have a whole deck for this that I call "Shut Up, Up." So it's really important that we become part of the communities, right? If we're going to be actively involved in helping to direct and plan our cities and make radical change, many of our communities know what they need. I was talking to my new friend over in Dallas, and we were joking about some of our residents. You think they've been to planning school, quite frankly, because they've done enough of the post-it dot exercises and the circle dot exercises. They've done it all. They could probably lead some of your own charrettes. And so it's important that we actually become much more involved in our communities. I told all my staff that they are required to go to meetings that are not city meetings, right? Like you have to. So like the family reunion, the barbecue. Who here has seen Poetic Justice? God damn, y'all are young. Okay, so there's a scene in Poetic Justice. There's Janet Jackson, Tupac, yada yada yada. But there's a family reunion, and they're not part of the family, but they just walk up on the family reunion and just make plates and start talking to people. So I tell our staff that you need to be infused in these communities. If you're in a park in your community, go to the family meeting, go to the school PTO meeting, go to those kinds of sessions, and people will begin to recognize you as someone that actually cares about the community that you're trying to serve. First of all, you go to a PTO meeting, the school will always have you speak. They don't give a damn who you are. They will allow you time in the mic. That guarantee you. It never fails. But they begin to get a rapport and a trust level. Because the best icebreaker I had, and I did this for I didn't pretend to know Detroit, right? So for the first 4.5, 6 months I was there, I would go to different places and just be kind of in a background, whatever. And people would see you, they're like, who are you? My name's Antoine. Where you from? You know, I'm from New York, but I've been in Texas for a while. Oh, okay. What do you do? I work for the city. Let me tell you about the damn city. And everyone has their city story, right? So it was fantastic icebreaker, great intel. But, they didn't know I was a planning director. I was just some tall guy that works for the city. And you're able to understand what their challenges are, what their victories are, what their concerns are, what their pain points are. And so you really have to ensure that the people that you're working with are there to grow or help or change that community, but really desire to know that community. And so you can only know it by being a distinct part of it in some capacity.
Well, I love this question, by the way.
Go.
So, MC, I got your name. Okay. Is it okay if I go ahead? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. This stuff is hard, and yeah, we should be dissatisfied, right? We should be constantly working to improve our cities and how we are planning our cities and how our departments function. Something that we're doing in New York is we're doing stuff to try to fix the way we plan externally, but also internally. Like, how are we hiring? We have to hire differently because the demographic makeup of the Department of City Planning in New York does not look like New York City. And we gotta fix that. So when we hire now, with every candidate that a hiring manager wants to, advance, we are looking at the demographics of that division, the gender, the race, where people are going to school. We got a lot of GSD, we got, Columbia, we got to get, our community colleges in there too, we got to get Pratts, we got to get, Howards in there. So we are looking really hard at the demographics. And, someone who was, the first, who would have been like a first choice or first candidate because it's so, so beyond here, or so much more qualified than everybody else, just maybe making a pass now because we really have to diversify our own workforce. So that's something that we're very focused on. Something that we're doing, for our outward-facing work is we're trying to de-wonkify. Like, we have to be much more accessible.
It's a planning term.
Yes. I mean, I was raving about it with my fellow big city planners yesterday. That we got to make planning, more accessible, more user friendly, more also a sense of urgency. Like, this stuff is really we got to fix our housing crisis. Everyone has to do his or her part to fix the housing crisis. So part of this is, believe it or not, just marketing planning, making sure people understand they can participate in planning. So we've got a huge initiative at City Planning called, we're going to be the city of yes. We're going to say yes to zero carbon, yes to solving the affordable housing crisis, yes to economic opportunities, yes to jobs, and we're really trying to just make everything that we do much more accessible. So that's another big move that we're doing. Thanks for your question.
We have like a minute or two left, so
Right, I can do it in 30 seconds. You want
I'll
to
do
do
30.
Okay. Speed dating.
Good at this.
So what I would say is we use community navigators. So we are hiring people to do our community outreach and then having them report back, because at the end of the day, we're still government. Although Antoine's point about getting into community and sitting and just being there with them and not trying to promote anything is huge. And then the converse of that is we are now, as part of those community navigators, we also have high school community navigators that we're paying as interns. And I now have for the first time, a budget line item forever in my budget that is a internship program. So it's working with those starting in high school, because if we're only getting internships at the graduate level, I've already missed 80% of the diversity, at least in Colorado. And so starting in high school and undergrad and in grad school. So to the point about changing how we show up internally is having an internship program that has that diversity.
I would just say, real quick, great question. Think about that all the time. I mean, we're never satisfied, in essence, right? But we're always hopeful, and we're always hopeful for a better future and better cities and better communities that we're planning for. We always have to keep that in mind. We did a lot when we restructured when I got there. We actually have an Office of Racial Justice, Equity, and Transformative Planning, which we started a couple of years ago, which we have a core of about four people, four staffers, and we think about these issues of racial justice very deeply, and we think about them both internally and externally to the department. We knew we serve very diverse communities in Los Angeles, and we know we really can't serve them unless we're being genuine and honest and authentic. And so we had to do a lot of deep internal conversations with our own department to really think about, are we really taking equity seriously? Or we're not just producing reports and doing great graphics, but really thinking about it. So we really thought about and made some tough decisions. We about how do we actually operate ourselves? How do we give people assignments, have people have career paths, but also even the language we use. We actually are starting. We're putting out two things coming this next month. One of them is retiring words that are no longer really good for equity. In fact, the word grandfathering is used commonly in terminology, but it's only used because if a lot of my planners didn't know it, that you could only vote unless your grandfather voted. Of course, only men voted at the time. So that was a way that Black people in the United States were not allowed to vote. But now we use it to mean things like legal nonconforming. We're retiring basically racist words on there. Also, we have community meetings where we have racism that's blatant by the members of the public and people have a First Amendment right. We're actually also, in addition to that, having scripts that we can begin, that we will not allow that, and that we have actually community norms. Because what we're in essence are doing is we're trying to create safe space first for our staff to really be able to grow. And because if we're going to be able to create the right kind of communities in Los Angeles, we need to have the staff that feel safe to do that. My own background is, look, I've been out since the 1980s, and I was like the first out gay person that a lot of people in my career knew. So being that first person in these spaces is something that I had to do a lot in my career, and have these really uncomfortable conversations about what it means to be a gay man in 1988 in a workplace was really very different than it is today. So you need to, I remember what that was like early in my career and how I didn't feel, how I knew we needed that. So we've really worked hard in our department to create those kind of safe spaces for all of our employees. We've had a really tough week this last week in Los Angeles, and it's been hard. I will tell you, it's really brought us to our core, and especially this department that I'm in. The first thing I did was make sure that we had the spaces to be able to have those conversations in our department. Luckily, we had built the infrastructure of it, if you will, over the last couple of years. We're still having those conversations. It's not who we are as a department, but we still need to plan these communities and do it in a real meaningful way. So I would just kind of keep that in mind, that we are thinking about those types of things. And I would just encourage everyone, if that's what you care about, pursue your passion, wherever that may be, and that you can be a planner any time of your life. You don't have to come to it right away. We actually hire a lot of people from community-based nonprofits, Appointment Beautiful, Thai Community Center SAGE, which stands for Strategic Actions for a Just Economy. I know Lakeisha Hola is the planning director at Miami, who worked in our department in the past, has had a lot of different experiences in her past too, and just really just a lot of appreciation for who she is and what she's brought to this department. And she's the kind of person that I think that we could all learn from in terms of how you can kind of approach your career. I'm just sorry, I gotta give you a shout out. Yeah, but just think about those. So I'll just end it right there. But think about it. Just think about this. Fundamentally, planning's about people, and we always have to keep that in mind.